Blink and you would have missed it, in the British press at least. But at the end of last month, it was revealed that the Council of Europe has approved a report condemning extensive and often virulent attacks on LGBTQ rights in the following countries: Hungary, Poland, Turkey, Russia, and wait for it, the United Kingdom. Now, to be clear, and I want to make this clear from the outset, no one is suggesting that things are as bad for LGBTQ people here in Britain as they are in some of the countries mentioned. In Hungary, for example, homosexuality is still illegal. However, what this report noted is that the UK is moving backwards in terms of LGBTQ equality. And I watched a really interesting discussion earlier today with Ben Hunt, who you will remember was interviewed on this show yesterday. And he appeared on Owen Jones's podcast today. And he described being at a garden party at Number 10 during Theresa May's premiership, with a number of other LGBTQ campaigners and key figures and charities celebrating what he described as this dossier of promises on LGBTQ rights that Theresa May's government was set to implement. And since then, those promises have been reneged on by Johnson's cabinet. Since 2019, there's been some really troubling developments. We've seen the rise to prominence and positions of significant influence, groups who advocate for conversion therapy, which is the practice of torturing LGBTQ people, for example. And while she held her role, Liz Truss was described by members of her own department as the Minister for Inequalities. In March of last year, 3 key advisors to her and Kemi Badenoch resigned from the department, and they cited a hostile environment for LGBTQ people as their reason for doing so. And then last week, it emerged that employees of the EHRC have voiced similar concerns. The Equalities and Human Rights Commission, a body that was set up specifically to advocate for equality and human rights, as their name would suggest. Former and current members of staff went to Vice magazine and anonymously reported concerns that there was a similar anti-LGBTQ culture there. Now, of course, on the surface of it, this is all about the so-called trans debate. And did you know that outside the UK, we are known as the transphobia capital of the world? We're often referred to as TERF Island. TERF, of course, stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist, because we lead the charge globally on demonising and misrepresenting trans people. That's not a record we can be proud of, is it? Reforms to the Gender Recognition Act, for example, which have happened in 14 countries throughout the world, several American states, and were promised by Theresa May for England, will actually just mean, these are what the changes, the proposed changes to the Gender Recognition Act would mean, that it's easier for trans people to be listed as their true gender on their death and marriage certificates. Trans people can already have their true gender on their passport and driving licence. That's literally all it would mean. But for some reason, this was turned in the media into a debate about women's spaces. The Gender Recognition Act had nothing to do with women's spaces. It has been the fact for a very long time that a trans person can go into a toilet which is for their chosen gender or for their true gender. You have definitely peed next to a trans person in your life, and you didn't even know about it. But we've started to see all of these apparently women's rights organisations popping up all over the place, which strangely never talk about women's rights in any other context than where there is this kind of false tension between cisgender women's rights and transgender rights. That's the only time they want to talk about women's rights. They don't talk about women's safety in any other context other than when it's an opportunity to bash trans people. We've seen all of these organisations start to pop up, and they're being given greater prominence. Some of them are even advising government. So on the surface of it, this is all about trans people. But I want to be very clear about this. As an LGBTQ person myself, this does not and will not stop with trans people. I happen to be invested in trans people as a community because it's just a situation that appeals to my sense of justice. I'm not trans myself. I have transgender friends, but actually I made those transgender friends as a result of my advocacy rather than the other way around. I didn't really know anybody that was transgender when I started being vocal in my allyship. I just saw what was going on and felt that I had to call it out. But I don't expect everyone to feel the same way when we're talking about less than 1% of the population. So if you're one of those people who says, I just don't have the headspace to care about trans people, what I will say to you is bigotry doesn't and won't stop with the 1%. This moral panic that has been whipped up around trans people is a chink in the armour of human rights. And people will use that chink to take away all kinds of hard-won rights for other minorities and oppressed people too. So I wish it had surprised me yesterday when I saw a headline in the Daily Mail which read thusly, has Cambridge University broken out of its woke straitjacket? College refuses to fly divisive pride flag because only its own banner unites the whole community. I'm enormously troubled by that. By the notion that the pride flag is divisive. The pride flag is a statement. If you fly the pride flag, what you're saying is LGBTQ people are welcome and safe here. You're not saying straight people aren't welcome. It might say straight people who aren't going to make LGBTQ people feel welcome and safe aren't welcome. But that's a necessary statement to make in light of the fact that last year it was reported that LGBTQ hate crime has risen, with reports of abuse hurled at someone who identified as LGBTQ because of their appearance or mannerisms, a fleeting or profound show of affection towards a partner, gay men being beaten and robbed as happened in a suspected homophobic attack in Edinburgh in August last year, or a trans man savagely attacked in Bournemouth early in 2021. Just this week, the killers of Dr. Gary Jenkins were sentenced. This is a 17-year-old girl and two men who have been found guilty of a sadistic homophobic murder of a consultant psychiatrist in a city centre park. The three of them tortured Dr. Gary Jenkins by kicking and punching him and stamping on his head for up to 30 minutes as he begged them to stop. And I'm sorry if this is upsetting to you, but you need to know this. You need to know that this is happening. And afterwards, one of the attackers, who was 16 at the time, said, I needed that. Stonewall have raised concerns at the way the prosecution presented the case. They apparently told the jury that the victim's sexual predilections would be his undoing and that he was well liked despite his lifestyle choices. A spokesperson for Stonewall said remarks made during the trial have further eroded the trust that our communities have in the justice system, where 4 in 5 of LGBTQ people already do not report hate incidents to the police. As people across the UK mourn the heartbreaking loss of Dr. Jenkins, the government must take urgent action to challenge anti-LGBTQ attitudes and to ensure all of our communities are safe and free. But they're not doing that.